You think you're self-made? You're just an unpaid debt in high heels, Elena. My father spat, slamming a thick leather binder onto my Italian marble kitchen island. The sound echoed through my Manhattan penthouse like a gunshot, shattering the fragile peace of my morning. I didn't flinch. I didn't even put down my espresso cup. I just looked at the binder, then at the three people standing in my kitchen as if they owned the zip code. My father, Arthur, looked older, his suit slightly tight around the middle, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of desperation and greed. My mother, Beatrice, was busy appraising my $15,000 Swarovski chandelier with the eyes of a hungry hawk. And then there was Serafina, my younger sister, leaning against my floor-to-ceiling window. Her face twisted in a smirk that cost more in Botox than most people make in a year. "I'm sorry, I must have missed the part where I invited a circus into my home," I said, my voice a low, dangerous hum. "How did you get in here?" "The emergency key you gave us 3 years ago, honey." Beatrice sighed, finally squeezing out a performative tear. She didn't look me in the eye. She was too busy checking the label on my designer coat. "We had to see you. You've been distant. Ever since the Forbes 30 Under 30 list came out, it's like you've forgotten where you came from." "I haven't forgotten anything, Beatrice," I snapped. I stood up, the sheer height of my heels giving me a commanding view of the room. "I remember exactly where I came from. A windowless basement where I worked 18-hour days while you were busy funding Serafina's failed influencer trips to Bali. Now what is this?" Arthur pushed the binder toward me. "It's an invoice, Elena. We checked the math. Adjusted for inflation and interest, $750,000. That's what it cost to turn you into this. We'd like our return on investment now." I opened the binder. I expected a lawsuit. I did not expect a line-itemized spreadsheet of my entire existence. It was a masterpiece of cold-blooded pettiness. Diapers and formula. Years 0 to 3, $12,400. Prorated share of mortgage. For childhood bedroom, $85,000. Emotional labor and parenting fees. Billed at $45 per hour. $150,000 at the bottom, in bold red ink, was the final figure. $750,000. "You're actually charging me for being born?" I asked, a sharp, cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. "It's a business matter now, Elena," Serafina chirped, picking up a crystal vase from my shelf and inspecting it with a sneer. "You used Dad's resources to build Ethelgard. The laptop you had at 19? Bought with family money? That means the company isn't yours. It's ours. We want the cash, and we want 40% equity, or we go to the press." The rage didn't hit me hot. It hit me like a sub-zero wave. I looked at Arthur. This was the man who had ignored my graduation to attend Serafina's pageant. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a portfolio that had finally matured. "I took $3,000 from my own savings, money I earned working at a greasy diner, to buy my first server," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You didn't invest a cent. You laughed at me until my name started making more in a week than you make in a year." "Watch your tone," Arthur roared, his face turning purple. "We gave you life. You wouldn't be standing in this penthouse if it weren't for us. You're an ungrateful, selfish witch." "I am better than you," I whispered, stepping into his space. "Because I don't steal from my blood. Now get out. My security is already downstairs. And Arthur? I already disabled that emergency key the second you stepped inside. Don't test me." Beatrice let out a horrified gasp. "Elena, how can you be so cruel? It's family." "Family is a bond of love, not a debt collection agency," I retorted. I walked to the door and flung it open. Leave. Now. As they filed out, Serafina rolled her eyes. You're making a mistake, Elle. New York Fashion Week is in 3 days. It would be a shame if your big launch was ruined by a massive scandal. The door clicked shut and the digital lock engaged. I was alone, but I wasn't safe. I walked to my desk and dialed a number I had saved for an emergency. Harrison? I said when my lawyer picked up. The vultures are here. They want to audit my life? Fine. Let's start by auditing theirs. I want the scorched earth protocol ready by dawn. The next 3 days were a frantic race against the devil. New York Fashion Week, NYFW, had descended upon the city like a fever. And my Iron Muse collection was the centerpiece of the storm. I should have been obsessing over every stitch, but instead, I was glued to security feeds. I knew Arthur and Beatrice. They were parasites, and when the host fights back, they secrete venom. Friday morning, the catastrophe went nuclear. I was backstage at the final rehearsal, the runway lights reflecting off my steel and silk designs, when my phone vibrated uncontrollably. It was my CFO. Elena, the bank just froze all corporate accounts, he stammered, his voice laced with panic. I felt the blood in my veins turn to slush. Frozen? On what grounds? A temporary injunction for unjust enrichment, he explained. Arthur Anderson filed an emergency claim, swearing he's a founding shareholder and that you're liquidating assets to flee. The bank has to comply until a hearing. I stumbled back, hitting a clothing rack. 3 days before Black Friday. 3 days before the biggest show of my life. Without liquid cash, I couldn't pay the stage crews, the models, or the manufacturer to release my inventory. They weren't just suing me. They were trying to bankrupt me in 72 hours. But that was only the first strike. Elena, look at this, my assistant said, thrusting a tablet into my hands. A video was spreading like wildfire. It was Serafina. She was sitting in a dimly lit room. No makeup, her eyes red from performative weeping. I never thought I'd have to do this, Serafina sobbed into the lens. But my sister, Elena, the woman you praise as a self-made icon, actually stole our parents' life savings. She manipulated them while they were sick. Now she's in a Manhattan penthouse while they face homelessness. We just want justice. The comments were a bloodbath. Hashtag cancel Elena. Hashtag boycott Ethelgard. My loyal customers were turning into an angry mob, hurling insults at the brand I had built with my own sweat and blood. I slammed the tablet onto the floor. The shattering glass was the only thing that felt real. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was Beatrice. Are you satisfied? I hissed. Elena, honey, she cooed with sickening sweetness. It doesn't have to be this ugly. Your father just wants the respect he's earned. Sign the settlement and we'll drop the injunction by afternoon. You can still have your little fashion show. Don't let your ego ruin everything. You're terrorists, I spat. You're not family. You're kenneled dogs trying to bite the hand that finally stopped feeding you. Dogs bite when they're hungry, Elena. Her voice turned ice cold. You have 2 hours. After that, we release evidence of your tax evasion. True or not, your brand won't survive the scandal. The line went dead. I caught my reflection in a vanity mirror. I was pale, but my eyes were burning with a white-hot, vengeful light. They thought by cutting my throat and burning my name, they could force me to my knees. They forgot that I built this empire while they were busy looking down on me. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison. Harrison, initiate phase 2 of Scorched Earth right now, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. I want every tax record my father has touched in 20 years. I want every cent he's hidden from the IRS. And Harrison, I'm here, Elena. I want to buy up every delinquent debt his trucking company owns. I want to be his primary creditor before the sun goes down. If he wants to play business, I'll show him how a hostile takeover feels. I hung up, smoothed my hair, and stepped out onto the runway. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about seeing who was still standing when the world stopped burning. The air in the courtroom tasted of floor wax and old paper, a sterile environment for a bloodbath. Arthur and Beatrice sat on the plaintiff's side, looking like the picture of geriatric fragility. Arthur wore a suit that was slightly too large, his shoulders hunched to make him look smaller, more pitiable. Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief every time the judge looked her way. Behind them sat Serafina, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. They thought they had already won. The asset freeze was still in place, and the Iron Muse launch was hanging by a thread. Your Honor, their attorney began, his voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. These are loving parents who sacrifice their own stability to fund their daughter's ambitions. We have submitted Exhibit A, a meticulous ledger of expenses incurred while raising the defendant. This isn't just a list of costs, it's a record of a verbal investment agreement that Elena Anderson has ungratefully breached. The judge, a stern woman named Miller, flipped through the binder, the same one Arthur had slammed on my countermeasure. She looked at me with thin, unimpressed lips. Ms. Anderson, this ledger is incredibly detailed. It suggests a clear expectation of repayment. Familial ingratitude isn't a crime, but breach of contract is. Unless you have a compelling defense, I am inclined to maintain the freeze. I felt Arthur's eyes on me. I didn't look back, but I could feel his smirk. A tiny, triumphant twitch of the lip. He thought the detail of his spreadsheet was his weapon. He didn't realize it was his noose. Harrison stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He simply adjusted his glasses and pulled a single folder from his briefcase. Your Honor, we don't dispute the existence of these expenses, Harrison said, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. In fact, we are grateful the plaintiff was so thorough, because by submitting this document as a business ledger for services rendered and investment costs, Mr. Anderson has inadvertently solved a much larger mystery for the IRS. The smirk on Arthur's face faltered. If Arthur Anderson insists that this $750,000 was a professional business loan and fees for services, Harrison continued, walking toward the bench, then these payments constitute taxable income that he has failed to report for over 2 decades. However, our forensic audit of Mr. Anderson's own trucking company revealed something even more interesting. Harrison handed a set of documents to the judge and a copy to the opposing counsel, whose face suddenly went pale. Mr. Anderson didn't fund Elena's life out of savings. Our investigation shows he has been systematically embezzling from his employees' pension fund to cover his personal debts and Serafina's lifestyle. He sued my client not because he was owed money, but because he needed a $750,000 infusion to fill the hole in the pension fund before the federal auditors arrived next month. The silence in the room was deafening. Arthur's fragile posture vanished as he sat bolt upright, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. By itemizing every diaper and utility bill to prove a debt, Mr. Anderson has created a notarized confession of his own financial fraud, I said, speaking for the first time, my voice echoing with cold authority. He wanted to audit my life? Congratulations, Father. You just audited yourself. Judge Miller's expression shifted from skepticism to pure disgust. She looked at the tax returns, then at the ledger, then at my father. Mr. Anderson, she said, the ice in her voice enough to freeze the room. Is this accurate? Arthur opened his mouth, but only a strangled croak came out. Beatrice stopped dabbing her eyes. She looked like she wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Case dismissed with prejudice, Judge Miller announced, slamming her gavel with a finality that made Serafina jump. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the federal prosecutor's office for a full criminal investigation into embezzlement and tax evasion. Mr. Anderson, I suggest you find a defense attorney, a real one. As the room erupted into whispers, I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I walked past their table, stopping just for a second. The launch is still on, Arthur, I whispered, leaning down. But you won't be watching it from a penthouse. You'll be watching it from a cage. I walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind me. The freeze was lifted. My empire was safe. But as I reached the courthouse steps, I knew I wasn't done yet. Breaking my bank account was their first mistake. Forgetting that I owned the ground they stood on was their last. The adrenaline from the courtroom victory hadn't faded. It had merely sharpened into a cold, surgical precision. While Arthur and Beatrice were likely scrambling to find a lawyer who wouldn't laugh at their criminal prospects, I was sitting in the back of a black sedan, heading toward the leafy suburbs of Connecticut. Is the paperwork finalized? I asked, not taking my eyes off the passing trees. Signed, sealed, and delivered, Harrison replied from the front seat. The bank was more than happy to offload the delinquent mortgage of Anderson Trucking and the residential property. Since they hadn't made a payment in 5 months, the foreclosure was already in its final stages. You didn't just buy the debt, Elena. You bought the dirt they're standing on. Good, I whispered. I want the ghosts out of my house. When we pulled up to the driveway of my childhood home, a sprawling colonial that had always felt more like a museum of my mother's vanity than a place of warmth. The scene was already chaotic. A sheriff's deputy was standing by the front door, and several moving crates were scattered on the lawn. Arthur and Beatrice were there, looking disheveled and frantic. Serafina was sitting on a designer suitcase, screaming into her phone, likely trying to find a friend whose vibe included housing a disgraced family of 3. As I stepped out of the car, Beatrice spotted me. She lunged forward, her face a mask of pure distilled venom. You monster! We were just humiliated in front of the whole world, and now this? Men are here telling us we have 2 hours to pack? Who do you think you are? I'm the landlord, Beatrice, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. Arthur stumbled toward me, his tie undone, his eyes bloodshot. What are you talking about? This is my house. I built this life. You built it on stolen pension funds and unpaid debts, Arthur, I countered, crossing my arms. The bank foreclosed on this property 90 days ago. I bought the note through a holding company last week. You aren't being evicted by a faceless corporation. You're being evicted by the daughter you tried to bankrupt. You can't do this, Serafina shrieked, jumping up from her suitcase. It's my birthday weekend. I have a party planned. Where are we supposed to go? I hear the local motel has a family rate, I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. Or perhaps you can sell that coat I bought you. It should cover a week at a decent Airbnb. Elena, please! Beatrice sobbed, shifting back into her role as the victim. We have nowhere to go. Everything is frozen. Your father is He's facing prison. Have you no heart? My heart was in that binder you slammed on my counter, remember? I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. You itemized every diaper. You billed me for emotional labor. Well, consider this my final payment. I'm relieving you of the burden of this house. I'm relieving you of the burden of me. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. Time's up, Mr. Anderson. We need you to vacate the premises now. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The man who had spent my entire life making me feel small was now being ushered off his own porch like a common trespasser. Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Not the fear of a businessman losing a deal, but the fear of a predator realizing the prey had grown teeth. "I'll kill you for this," Arthur hissed, his voice trembling with rage as he moved toward me. "I'll take everything back." "You'll have to do that from a federal cell," I replied, not moving an inch. "Goodbye, Arthur. Don't forget your binder on the way out." As they began throwing bags into their car, I watched Serafina. She didn't help her mother. She didn't comfort her father. Instead, she was frantically checking her reflection in the car window, trying to see if her crying face looked good for her next video. They had created a monster in her, and now, without my money to fuel the fire, they were about to find out exactly how much loyalty their golden child really had. I walked up the steps and into the house. It smelled of expensive candles and rot. I looked at the height marks etched into the kitchen doorway, the only evidence that I had ever existed in this place. I took a permanent marker from my bag and drew a thick, black line over the top mark. My mark. I was no longer a debt to be collected. I was the architect of my own world, and the old one was finally, beautifully, demolished. The grand finale of New York Fashion Week didn't just happen. It exploded. As the lights dimmed in the massive industrial warehouse I'd rented in Brooklyn, a hush fell over the crowd of editors, celebrities, and critics. The music started, a deep, rhythmic thrum that felt like a heartbeat. My models marched out, clad in iron mews, looking like warriors carved from moonlight and steel. But the real show was happening on the giant screens behind the runway. Instead of just abstract visuals, I had programmed a ticker tape of real-time data, Ethelgard sales metrics, global shipping routes, and live growth charts. It was a middle finger to everyone who had doubted me. It was a statement. I am not just a designer. I am a machine. Behind the scenes, my phone was a graveyard of notifications. Arthur Anderson. Arrested. Bail denied. Beatrice Anderson. Homeless shelter intake confirmed. And then, the most delicious one of all. A viral video of Serafina. Not the one she'd planned, but a grainy dashcam clip of her peeling out of the courthouse parking lot, leaving her parents stranded on the sidewalk while they screamed her name. The golden child had finally shown her true colors. She hadn't stayed to help them pack. She had taken the only car and the remaining jewelry and vanished into the night. The monster they had raised had finally eaten them. After the final walk, I stepped onto the runway. The applause was deafening, a roar of approval that washed over me like a baptism. I didn't look for my family in the front row. I knew they weren't there. For the first time in 26 years, I didn't feel the weight of their expectations or the sting of their neglect. I felt light. I felt invincible. An hour later, I was back in my penthouse, the silence a welcome contrast to the chaos of the show. I poured myself a glass of vintage scotch and stood by the window, looking out at the glittering veins of Manhattan. My phone buzzed. A restricted number. "What do you want, Serafina?" I asked, not even bothering to say hello. "Elena, please," she sobbed, and this time the grief sounded real, the raw, ugly sound of someone who had finally run out of options. The bank took the car. I'm at a gas station in Jersey. I have no money, no place to stay. Mom and Dad they're gone, Elle. You have to help me. I'm your sister. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw a woman who had been itemized, audited, and betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love her. You remember that spreadsheet, Serafina? I asked, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. The one where you all billed me for my existence? I checked the math again today. What are you talking about? I don't owe you anything, I said. In fact, according to my calculations, you've been overpaid for years. You lived off my shadow, ate off my plate, and tried to burn my house down for warmth. The debt is settled, Serafina, permanently. You can't just leave me here, she shrieked. Watch me, I replied, and I ended the call. I opened my contacts list. Father, delete. Mother, delete. Serafina, delete. With 3 taps, I erased the ghosts of my past. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The Black Friday launch had just gone live. The numbers were climbing. $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, in a matter of minutes. My servers were humming, my warehouses were moving, and my empire was breathing. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or an unpaid debt. I was Elena Anderson, the CEO of Ethelgard, the owner of my destiny, and the architect of my own reality. I took a sip of my drink, the burn of the alcohol matching the fire in my soul. Outside, the city continued to roar, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a part of the noise. I was the one conducting the orchestra. The bill for my existence had been paid in full, and I had kept the change. Don't let anyone use family as an excuse to drain you or claim your success. Family should be your backbone, not a debt collector. Protect your peace and your hard work. Cutting out toxic people isn't selfish. It's survival. Thanks for listening. If this story hit home, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more. See you next time.